The phrase utterly without prospects was, I believe, how my brother-in-law, Gerald, chose to describe me to his golfing buddies, a delightful anecdote relayed to me with barely concealed glee by his wife, my sister-in-law, Cynthia. It was just before the main course arrived at my in-laws' annual anniversary dinner, a command performance I dutifully attended for the past 17 years. My name is Arthur Albright, 52 years old, and for the last 2 decades, I've been what most of my wife's family would charitably call a tinkerer, or less charitably, as Gerald had so eloquently put it, a man without prospects. In reality, I am a specialist in antique horology and automata restoration, a niche field requiring patience, meticulous precision, and an almost obsessive understanding of intricate mechanics, qualities not highly prized in Cynthia and Gerald's world of aggressive networking and leverage buyouts. My wife, Eleanor, bless her steadfast heart, squeezed my hand under the heavy damask tablecloth, a silent apology for her family's casual cruelty. She was a botanist, a woman who understood the slow, patient unfolding of complex life, and she alone seemed to grasp that my quiet, often solitary work was not a sign of failure, but of a different kind of dedication. Honestly, Arthur, my mother-in-law, Beatrice, chimed in, her voice dripping with a concern that felt more like condescension. It's not too late to retrain, you know. Gerald was saying his firm is looking for junior analysts. It's mostly data entry, but it's a start, a proper job, with a pension. Her husband, my father-in-law, Philip, a retired executive who measured a man's worth by the size of his portfolio and the make of his car, merely grunted in agreement, not even bothering to look up from dissecting his shrimp cocktail with surgical precision. The unspoken addendum hung in the air. Unlike your current, peculiar, and clearly unprofitable obsession with old clocks and broken wind-up toys. I offered a polite, non-committal smile. Thank you for the suggestion, Beatrice. I'll certainly keep it in mind. There was no point in arguing, no point in explaining the intricate beauty of a Cinefonderfode singing Bird Box or the historical significance of a Jacquet Draws automaton. To them, if it didn't generate an immediate, visible profit or confer a certain social status, it was worthless. My small workshop, crammed with tiny tools, magnifying glasses, and the silent, patient mechanisms of a bygone era, was in their eyes a testament to my chronic inability to engage with the real world. Eleanor's hand tightened on mine. I knew this was as painful for her as it was for me, perhaps more so, as she bore the brunt of their disappointment in her choice of husband. We'd met in a dusty little antique shop, me haggling over a broken marine chronometer, she searching for a rare botanical print. We'd connected over a shared appreciation for things overlooked, for the beauty in the complex and the forgotten. Her family, however, had never quite forgiven her for not marrying a doctor, a lawyer, or, at the very least, someone with a comprehensible job title and a company car. The conversation, mercifully, was diverted by the arrival of the roast lamb, a dish Beatrice prided herself on, though it was invariably overcooked. The usual topics surfaced: Gerald's latest golf handicap, Cynthia's new charity committee, mostly an excuse for lavish luncheons, as far as I could tell, the ever-escalating achievements of their 2 prodigiously talented and equally unbearable children currently away at expensive boarding schools. I ate quietly, contributing little, my mind already elsewhere, not on the dry lamb or the stilted conversation, but on the intricate calculations and delicate adjustments I'd been working on for the past 3 years, a project so far removed from their understanding of prospects that it might as well have been taking place on another planet. A project that was, unbeknownst to any of them, about to reach its astonishing culmination. As dessert, a trifle that looked suspiciously like it had been assembled from leftover Christmas pudding and tinned fruit was being served. Cynthia, with a predatory glint in her eye, turned to me. "So, Arthur," she began, her voice saccharine, "any exciting clock repairs on the horizon? Or are you still polishing those little brass cogs and dreaming of a bygone era?" The table tittered politely. Eleanor flushed. Before I could formulate a suitably bland reply, my phone, which I'd placed on silent beside my plate, vibrated. A single discreet buzz. I glanced at the screen. A prearranged signal from my solicitor, Alistair Finch, the other Alistair Finch in my life, a man whose understanding of complex mechanisms extended to the equally intricate workings of international law and high finance. The message was brief. Phase 1 complete. Courier en route to your current location. ETA, 15 minutes. Congratulations, Arthur. I felt a slow smile spread across my face, a genuine, unforced smile that seemed to momentarily disconcert Cynthia. Actually, Cynthia, I said, my voice calm, my gaze steady, I believe my prospects are about to become considerably more exciting. And as for bygone eras, some of them hold treasures beyond your wildest imaginings. Just then, through the large bay window overlooking the perfectly manicured circular driveway of Beatrice and Philip's ostentatious suburban home, I saw the sleek, black silhouette of a Rolls-Royce Phantom glide silently to a halt. A uniformed chauffeur emerged, opened the rear passenger door with a practiced, deferential air, and stood waiting. The entire dinner party, mid-trifle, seemed to freeze, their spoons hovering, their eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning, horrified curiosity. Even Philip paused in the act of pontificating about the declining standards of modern port. The doorbell chimed, a polite, discreet sound that nevertheless seemed to echo through the suddenly silent dining room like a cannon shot. Beatrice looked at Philip, then at Cynthia, then at me, her fork clattering against her plate. "Good heavens," she whispered. "Who on earth could that be?" I placed my napkin neatly beside my dessert plate, pushed back my chair, and stood up. "I believe," I said, my voice resonating with a quiet authority they had never heard from me before, "that would be for me." The tinkerer, the man without prospects, was about to demonstrate that the most valuable mechanisms are often the ones whose true worth is hidden, patiently waiting for the precise moment to reveal their astonishing, life-altering power. The quiet accumulation of years of dedicated, underestimated work was about to strike 12 with a resounding, and for some, deeply uncomfortable chime. The walk from a dining room to the front door of Beatrice and Philip's house felt like traversing a vast, suddenly silent auditorium. Every eye fixed on me. Eleanor, a mixture of apprehension and dawning excitement in her eyes, started to rise, but I gave her a small, reassuring nod. This was a moment I needed to navigate alone, at least initially. The uniformed chauffeur, a stoic, impeccably dressed man who looked like he'd stepped out of a pre-war film, inclined his head respectfully as I opened the door. "Mr. Arthur Albright?" he inquired, his voice a low, cultured baritone. "Yes, that's me," I replied. "A package for you, sir, and your transport is ready when you are." He gestured with a white-gloved hand towards the gleaming black Rolls-Royce, its presence on this quiet suburban street as incongruous as a Fabergé in a hardware store. He then presented me with a slim, expensive-looking leather document case. I took it, the cool, smooth leather a pleasant contrast to the years of handling rough wood and cold metal in my workshop. "Thank you," I said. "I'll just be a moment." Turning back into the house, I found the entire dinner party, including Beatrice and Philip, now clustered in the hallway, their faces a comical tableau of shock and avid curiosity. Gerald, my brother-in-law, who had been so quick to label me utterly without prospects, looked particularly gobsmacked, his jaw slack, his eyes wide. Cynthia, his wife, was openly gaping, her usually perfect composure completely shattered. "Arthur," Beatrice finally managed, her voice a reedy whisper, "what on earth is going on? Who is that man? Was that car?" "That, Beatrice," I said calmly, holding up the leather document case, "is a representative of the Patek Philippe Museum in Geneva. And the car, I believe, is their standard mode of transport for consultants working on acquisitions of particular significance." The name Patek Philippe, a brand synonymous with astronomical wealth and unparalleled craftsmanship in the world of horology, landed in the opulent hallway with the force of a perfectly weighted pendulum. Even Philip, whose knowledge of luxury goods was usually confined to golf clubs, and single malt whiskeys, visibly stiffened. Gerald, who prided himself on his supposed financial acumen, let out a small, choked sound. "Patek Philippe?" he stammered. But you just fix old clocks, Arthur. Broken cuckoos and rusty springs." "Not entirely, Gerald," I replied, allowing a small, dry smile to touch my lips. "For the past 3 years, I've been engaged in a rather complex and discreet project. It involved the authentication, historical research, and ultimately, the complete restoration of a unique collection of 18th-century automata and complicated timepieces, a collection whose existence was previously only rumored, hidden away for generations in a forgotten wing of a crumbling Scottish castle." I paused, letting the details sink in. The collection, it turns out, was assembled by a rather eccentric but extraordinarily wealthy ancestor of the current laird. Its value, once its provenance and mechanical integrity were fully established by my work, is, well, let's just say it's considerably more than the combined property values on this entire street. The history of my involvement with this particular collection was a story in itself, a slow burn of meticulous research and painstaking restoration. It had begun with a cryptic email from a London-based art solicitor, Alastair Finch, no relation to my own, though the coincidence had amused us both, who had heard of my specialized skills through a discreet network of horological experts. He'd invited me to Scotland, to a remote, windswept estate, to examine what he described as a few interesting but neglected family heirlooms. Those few interesting heirlooms had turned out to be a treasure trove, a lost world of mechanical marvels created by some of the greatest horological masters of the Enlightenment, pieces by Jacquet Draws, Vaucanson, and even a rumored, unfinished astronomical clock by Anti-Janvier. Most were in a deplorable state, damaged by centuries of neglect, damp, and clumsy attempts at repair. Restoring them had been the most challenging and ultimately the most rewarding work of my life. It had required not just my technical skills, but also my abilities as a historian, a detective, an engineer, and an artist. I'd spent weeks at a time in Scotland, living in a Spartan gatehouse on the estate, poring over dusty archives, meticulously cleaning and repairing infinitesimal gears and levers, often working late into the night by the light of a single lamp, the only sounds the sighing of the wind and the distant cry of an owl. Eleanor had been my rock throughout this period, understanding my need for solitude and intense focus, never complaining about my long absences, always offering quiet encouragement and unwavering belief in my abilities. She knew, even if her family didn't, that this was more than just a job for me. It was a passion, a calling. The Patek Philippe Museum, renowned for its unparalleled collection of timepieces, had been tracking rumors of this lost collection for decades. When Alastair Finch, acting on behalf of the Scottish laird who wished to remain anonymous but needed to fund the restoration of his crumbling ancestral home, had discreetly approached them with evidence of the collection's existence and my ongoing restoration work, they had expressed immediate and intense interest. The past year had been a whirlwind of negotiations, valuations, and further, even more intricate, restoration work to bring the key pieces to museum quality. The sum they had ultimately agreed to pay for the acquisition of the collection, and for my exclusive, multi-year consultancy contract to oversee its continued curation and study, was, to put it mildly, life-altering. A significant portion of that sum, my commission and consultancy fee, was detailed in the documents within the leather case I now held. "So," Cynthia said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and dawning, avaricious calculation, "you're saying you stumbled upon some old, valuable clocks? And these Swiss people are paying you for them?" "It was a little more complex than stumbling, Cynthia," I corrected gently. "It involved 3 years of intensive research, restoration, and a rather deep understanding of 18th century mechanical engineering and metallurgy. The Patek Philippe Museum is not in the habit of acquiring old, valuable clocks without exhaustive due diligence. And my role is not just about the acquisition. It's an ongoing consultancy. They value expertise, you see, something that, unlike a golf handicap or a seat on a charity committee, tends to appreciate over time, if properly maintained. Gerald looked like he was about to be sick. The man who had dismissed me as having no prospects was now confronted with the reality that my tinkering had yielded a return that likely dwarfed his entire investment portfolio. Philip, my father-in-law, was staring at me with a new, almost fearful respect. The language of significant wealth, of association with a globally revered institution like Patek Philippe, was a language he understood intimately. Beatrice simply looked bewildered, as if her entire understanding of the world, and her son-in-law's place in it, had been violently upended. I turned to Eleanor, who was now standing beside me, her hand resting lightly on my arm, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and a love that needed no external validation. "Eleanor, my dear," I said, "it seems we have a rather pressing engagement in Geneva. Would you do me the honor of accompanying me? I believe the views over the lake are quite spectacular this time of year, and I'm told the honorarium includes a rather generous per diem for spousal accompaniment." Eleanor's smile was radiant. "Arthur," she said, her voice filled with an emotion that made my heart swell, "I believe I would like that very much." I offered her my arm. As we walked towards the front door, towards the waiting Rolls-Royce and the astonished chauffeur, I paused and looked back at her stunned, silent family. "Beatrice, Philip," I said, my voice polite but firm. "Thank you for dinner. It was memorable. We'll send you a postcard from Switzerland." And with that, Eleanor and I stepped out into the cool evening air, leaving behind a dining room filled with the ruins of their misconceptions and the lingering, indigestible taste of overcooked lamb and humble pie. The door of the Rolls-Royce closed with a satisfying, solid thud, sealing us into a world of quiet luxury, a world I had built, cog by tiny cog, in the silence of my workshop, far from their dismissive gaze. The tinkerer had indeed found his treasure, and it was far more valuable and far more enduring than they could ever have comprehended. The journey in the Rolls-Royce was, as expected, impeccably smooth, a silent glide through the suburban streets that felt like a transition into another dimension. Eleanor sat beside me, her hand in mine, an expression of quiet elation on her face. She hadn't said much since we'd left her parents' house, but her eyes, when they met mine, were filled with a mixture of pride, amusement, and a touch of "I told you so" that was directed not at me, but at the collective short-sightedness of her family. "Well," she said finally, as we merged onto the highway, leaving the familiar landmarks of our old life behind, "that was quite the exit, Arthur. I don't think Mother will recover from the shock for at least a week, or the implications of the Patek Philippe honorarium." I chuckled. Beatrice's constitution is surprisingly robust when it comes to matters of perceived status, my dear. She'll recover. Whether she'll learn anything from the experience is another matter entirely. "And Gerald and Cynthia?" Eleanor mused, a smile playing on her lips. "I imagine Gerald is already on his phone, trying to find out how one gets into antique automata restoration. And Cynthia is probably calculating how quickly she can befriend the curator of the Patek Philippe Museum." "Let them," I said. "Their motivations are, as always, transparent. What matters is that you understood, Eleanor, that you always believed in what I was doing, even when it seemed obscure and unprospectful." She squeezed my hand. "Arthur, I never doubted your brilliance for a moment. I just wished, sometimes, that others could see it too. Not for my sake, but for yours. And for theirs, though they were too blind to appreciate it." The leather document case lay on the seat beside me. Inside, along with the preliminary contracts for my consultancy and the initial transfer document for my commission, was a first-class, open-ended ticket to Geneva for Eleanor and a reservation at one of the city's most exclusive lakeside hotels. Alastair Finch, the London solicitor, was a man who understood the importance of details and of celebrating success appropriately. "So, this Scottish castle," Eleanor said, her eyes sparkling with curiosity, "was it terribly romantic and mysterious? All hidden passages and windswept moors?" I smiled, recalling the often freezing, damp conditions of the gatehouse, the long, solitary hours, the sheer, painstaking effort of coaxing life back into those delicate, centuries-old mechanisms. It was atmospheric, I said, and the work itself was the most profound, intellectual, and technical challenge of my life. Imagine, Eleanor, holding in your hands a piece of clockwork so intricate, so ingenious, that it seems almost alive. A bird that sings a perfect bird song, a writer automaton that can pen a poem, all powered by nothing more than springs and gears, all conceived and built by a human mind 3 centuries ago. It's like touching history, like having a conversation with genius across the ages. Her eyes softened. I can see why you love it, Arthur. It's a world away from, well, from Gerald's quarterly reports and Cynthia's charity balls. Indeed, I agreed. And a world, it seems, that can be surprisingly lucrative when one stumbles upon a lost national treasure. The true story of the discovery was less stumbling and more a piece of brilliant detective work by Alastair Finch, who had pieced together clues from obscure auction records, family letters, and local folklore to locate the forgotten collection. My role had been to authenticate, to assess, and then, the most daunting task of all, to restore. Many of the pieces have been deemed irreparable by previous, less skilled assessors. But I'd seen the ghosts of their former glory, the faint traces of the master craftsman's intent, and I had been determined to bring them back. It had involved learning archaic techniques, sourcing, or even fabricating replacement parts that were accurate to the period, and an almost zen-like patience as I worked for months on a single, complex movement. The Patek Philippe Museum's interest had been a closely guarded secret, on my insistence and that of the laird. Premature publicity could have attracted unwelcome attention from less scrupulous collectors or even from those who might seek to exploit the laird's financial vulnerabilities. The negotiations had been complex, involving not just the sale price, but also agreements about the ongoing preservation of the collection, its accessibility for research, and my own role as its principal consultant and curator for the next decade. The sum involved was, indeed, staggering, but for the museum, it was about acquiring a unique, irreplaceable part of horological history, a collection that would elevate their already world-class status to an even higher plane. My commission, while substantial, was a reflection of the years of dedicated, specialized work I had invested and the unique expertise I brought to the table. As we approached the private airfield where a charter jet, another detail Alastair Finch had thoughtfully arranged, was waiting to take us to Geneva, Eleanor turned to me, her expression serious. "Arthur," she said, "this changes everything, doesn't it? For us." I considered her words. "It changes our financial circumstances, certainly, my dear. It will afford us comforts and opportunities we perhaps hadn't anticipated. But does it change us? I hope not. I'm still the man who loves tinkering with old clocks. And you are still the woman who appreciates the intricate beauty of a rare orchid. Those are the foundations, Eleanor. The rest is just pleasant superstructure." She smiled, a deep, contented smile that reached her eyes. "You always did have a way with engineering metaphors, Arthur." The jet was as luxurious as the Rolls-Royce, the flight crew discreet and attentive. As we ascended, leaving the familiar landscape of our old life far below, I felt not a sense of triumphant escape, but of quiet, profound satisfaction. It wasn't about proving my in-laws wrong, though there was a certain ironic justice in that. It was about the validation of a life's passion, about the recognition of skill and dedication that had long been overlooked or dismissed. It was about the quiet, meticulous work done in solitude for the love of the craft itself, finally finding its place in the world, and in doing so, transforming our future. Geneva welcomed us with the crisp, clean air of the Alps and the timeless elegance of a city built on precision and quality. Our hotel suite overlooked the lake, its waters reflecting the snow-capped peaks in the distance. It was a world away from Beatrice and Philip's overstuffed dining room, a world where craftsmanship was revered, where history was treasured, and where a man who understood the intricate dance of cogs and springs was not a mere tinkerer, but a respected artisan, a custodian of genius. The next day, my meetings at the Patek Philippe Museum began. The curators, the historians, the master watchmakers, they greeted me not as an outsider, but as a colleague and equal. They spoke my language, understood the passion that drove me, revered the masterpieces I had brought back from the brink of oblivion. We spent hours examining the first few pieces of the collection that had already been transported, discussing their history, their mechanics, their significance. It was like finding my tribe, a community of kindred spirits who saw the universe in a beautifully crafted escapement, who understood the poetry in a perfectly balanced pendulum. In their eyes, I was not a man without prospects. I was a guardian of time, a restorer of lost wonders. And that, I realized, was a valuation far more precious than any sum of money. The real treasure wasn't just the gold and brass and jewels of the automata. It was the recognition, the respect, the quiet and underscore profound sense of belonging I found in that rarefied world, a world built on the very principles I had dedicated my life to. And sharing that world with Eleanor, seeing the wonder in her eyes, as she too began to appreciate the artistry and ingenuity of these mechanical marvels, was the greatest honorarium of all. Our time in Geneva was a whirlwind of museum consultations, meetings with horological experts, and discreet discussions with Alastair Finch and the museum's legal team regarding the ongoing logistics of transporting and curating the rest of the Scottish collection. Eleanor, with her innate grace and intelligence, navigated this new, rarefied world with an ease that both surprised and delighted me. She charmed the stern Swiss curators with her genuine interest, asked insightful questions that demonstrated her quick grasp of complex concepts, and even began to develop a discerning eye for the artistic merits of different timepiece designs. "You know, Arthur," she confessed one evening as we strolled along the moonlit shores of Lake Geneva, "I think I'm beginning to understand your obsession. There's a certain magic to these little machines, isn't there? A whole universe captured in a space no bigger than my hand." I smiled. "That's precisely it, my dear. A universe of human ingenuity, patience, and a pursuit of perfection that transcends time." The news of our sudden, dramatic departure from Beatrice and Philip's anniversary dinner and the subsequent revelation of my unexpected professional triumph had, as expected, sent shockwaves through Eleanor's family. We received a flurry of text messages and voicemails, a predictable blend of bewildered disbelief, thinly veiled envy, and clumsy attempts at belated conciliation. Cynthia, ever the opportunist, sent a gushing email congratulating me on my fascinating new venture and casually mentioning that she and Gerald were planning a trip to Switzerland in the spring, and wouldn't it be lovely to catch up and perhaps see some of these famous clocks firsthand? We politely declined, citing my demanding schedule. Gerald, more directly, called Eleanor, his voice a mixture of incredulity and a dawning, horrified respect. "Eleanor," he blustered, This clock thing with Arthur, is it for real? I mean, Patek Philippe? That's serious money, isn't it?" Eleanor had handled him with cool precision. "Yes, Gerald, it's quite real. And yes, it's a significant undertaking. Arthur has been working on it for years, as you know. Or rather, as you would have known, had you ever taken a genuine interest in his work." The unspoken rebuke hung in the air. Beatrice and Philip were more circumspect. They sent a formal, slightly stiff note to our hotel, expressing their surprise and hoping we were enjoying the Swiss air. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of their past dismissiveness, but the very fact of the note, and its carefully neutral tone, spoke volumes. They were, at the very least, reassessing their previous, deeply flawed valuation of their son-in-law. The most telling communication, however, came a week into our stay. It was an email forwarded to me by Alastair Finch from none other than Bartholomew Thorne, Amanda's, my sister's. Not that this story involves her. Former solicitor, the one who had so confidently predicted my financial ruin in a previous, unrelated, and equally ill-judged family dispute that now seemed like a distant, almost comical prelude to this grander drama. Thorne, it seemed, had heard through the legal grapevine about my new association with Patek Philippe and the rather substantial figures involved. His email to Alistair was a masterpiece of obsequious backtracking, filled with fawning compliments about my undoubted genius and visionary expertise, and a not-so-subtle inquiry as to whether a man of my newfound international standing might perhaps require specialized legal counsel for managing complex global assets. Alistair had replied with a single, devastatingly polite sentence. Mr. Albright's legal and financial affairs are, and have always been, managed with the utmost competence and discretion. We do not anticipate requiring your particular services. I had to admire Alistair's restraint. My own response would likely have been somewhat more horologically direct, perhaps involving the precise and irreversible disassembly of Mr. Thorne's inflated ego. But the real work in Geneva was not about settling old scores or reveling in newfound status. It was about the future of the collection, about ensuring its long-term preservation and its accessibility to scholars and the public. I spent days in deep discussion with the museum's team, planning the new exhibition wing that would house these masterpieces, designing interactive displays that would explain their intricate mechanics, and developing a research program to further unravel their history. It was a profoundly stimulating and deeply fulfilling process. I was no longer just a restorer of individual pieces. I was a co-creator of a legacy, a bridge between the genius of the past and the appreciation of the future. Eleanor, meanwhile, had found her own niche. With her botanist's eye for detail and her art historian's understanding of aesthetics, she began to research the symbolic motifs and artistic influences in the designs of the automata and clock cases. She discovered connections to obscure 18th-century scientific treatises and allegorical paintings, adding a new layer of richness and understanding to the collection. The museum's head curator was so impressed with her insights that he formally invited her to contribute to the exhibition catalog. She was, to put it mildly, ecstatic. We were a team, Eleanor and I, each bringing our unique skills and passions to this shared, extraordinary adventure. Our old life, with its petty grievances and stifling expectations, felt a million miles away, a faded daguerreotype from a forgotten album. Here, in the heart of a city dedicated to precision and excellence, we were both, in our own ways, finally being seen, finally being valued for who we truly were. The prospects, it turned out, were not just exciting, they were limitless. And the greatest mechanism of all, the intricate, often unpredictable, but ultimately beautiful clockwork of life itself, seemed to be ticking along in perfect, harmonious synchrony. The man once deemed utterly without prospects was now shaping the future of one of Underscoreworld's most prestigious museums, his quiet dedication finally recognized, his passion finally given its grand stage. And his wife, the steadfast botanist who had always seen the beauty in the overlooked, was now an integral part of that grand design. The old cogs had indeed been polished, and they were gleaming brighter than anyone, least of all her family, could ever have imagined. Our initial stay in Geneva extended from a few weeks into a few months. The scope of the project with the Patek Philippe Museum was even more extensive than initially anticipated, and my role evolved from a mere consultant to a key architect of the new wing's design and curatorial strategy. Eleanor, too, became deeply involved, her research into the artistic and symbolic aspects of the collection proving invaluable. We found a charming apartment in the old town, overlooking a quiet square, a place that quickly began to feel like home. The contrast with Beatrice and Philip's oppressively formal suburban house, or even our own comfortable but perhaps uninspired previous residence, was profound. Here, surrounded by centuries of history and a vibrant intellectual culture, we both felt a sense of liberation, of new beginnings. We still received occasional, carefully worded communications from Eleanor's family. Beatrice sent a rather plaintive postcard asking if we might consider returning for Christmas, promising a much quieter, more intimate gathering this year. We politely declined, explaining that our commitments in Geneva would keep us occupied. The truth was neither of us had any desire to step back into that old dynamic. Not yet, perhaps not ever in the same way. The power balance had irrevocably shifted. Cynthia, in a particularly audacious move, attempted to connect with me on LinkedIn, her profile suddenly highlighting a newfound passion for horological heritage and philanthropic support of the arts. I ignored the request. Some bridges, once burned, are best left as picturesque ruins. Gerald, we heard through the family grapevine, had suffered some rather significant losses in the stock market due to a series of ill-advised, aggressive investments. His prospects, it seemed, were looking somewhat less robust than he usually liked to project. There was a certain ironic justice in that, though I took no particular pleasure in his misfortune. My focus was on the future, on the incredible opportunity that had unfolded before us. The restoration work itself continued to be a source of deep satisfaction. One particularly challenging piece was a magnificent astronomical clock that had been silent for over a century, its intricate orrery and celestial charts frozen in time. Bringing it back to life, hearing its complex chimes ring out once more, seeing its miniature planets resume their silent, elegant dance, was a moment of profound triumph, a tangible connection to the genius of its long-dead creator. It was a reminder that true craftsmanship, true vision, could indeed transcend time. Eleanor and I also began to explore the possibility of establishing a small foundation, using a portion of my commission to support apprenticeships in the dying arts of horological restoration and automata making. It felt like a way to honor the legacy of the craftsmen whose work I so admired, and to ensure that these extraordinary skills were not lost to future generations. This idea, born over late-night conversations in our Geneva apartment, filled us both with a new sense of purpose, a way to channel our unexpected good fortune into something meaningful and enduring. The Patek Philippe Museum, when I broached the idea with them, was incredibly supportive, even offering to partner with us on the initiative. One afternoon, Alastair Finch, the London solicitor who had been the catalyst for this entire extraordinary journey, came to visit us in Geneva. We had lunch at a small cafe by the lake, the autumn leaves swirling around us. "You know, Arthur," he said, a twinkle in his eye, "when I first contacted you about that rather dusty collection in Scotland, I had a feeling you were the right man for the job. But I must confess, I never quite envisioned it leading to all this." He gestured around the elegant cityscape, the aura of quiet prosperity. "You've not only restored a priceless collection, you've rather comprehensively restored your own life, haven't you?" I smiled. "It seems the principles of meticulous restoration apply to more than just clockwork, Alastair." "Indeed," he agreed. "And Mrs. Albright," he turned to Eleanor, "your contributions to the understanding of the collection's artistic context have been quite remarkable. You've uncovered layers of meaning that even the most seasoned horologists had overlooked." Eleanor flushed with pleasure. "It's been the most fascinating research project of my life, Alastair." Arthur opened up a whole new world to me. As Alastair prepared to leave, he paused. "I had a rather amusing call last week from a Mr. Philip Albright, your father-in-law, Arthur. He was inquiring, in a rather roundabout way, about the current market value of antique grandfather clocks. Apparently, he has one in his hallway that he's suddenly taken a renewed interest in. Seemed to think it might be a hidden masterpiece." We all chuckled. It seemed the ripples of our newfound circumstances were still spreading, creating unexpected eddies in the quiet backwaters of suburban family life. Perhaps Philip was finally beginning to see the world beyond his stock portfolio, to appreciate the value in things not measured solely by their quarterly returns. The limousine that had picked me up from Beatrice and Philip's anniversary dinner now felt like a distant memory, a symbolic vehicle that had transported us not just to another country, but to another life, a life where our true worth was recognized, our passions validated, and our future filled with exciting, unprospectful prospects. We were no longer defined by the narrow, materialistic judgments of others, but by our own contributions, our own discoveries, our own quiet, meticulous pursuit of excellence and meaning. The most intricate mechanism, I had learned, was not a clock or an automaton, but life itself. And with patience, skill, and a steadfast partner, even its most neglected or damaged parts could be restored to a state of astonishing, harmonious beauty. The tinkerer had not just found his place. He had, in a very real sense, created it, one carefully calibrated cog, one precisely polished jewel at a time. And the prospects, I knew with a quiet certainty that resonated deeper than any chiming clock, were truly magnificent. Our life in Geneva settled into a rhythm of stimulating work, cultural exploration, and quiet domestic contentment. The Patek Philippe Museum's new wing, which we had both contributed to significantly, was nearing completion, and the anticipation within the horological world was immense. The lost collection, as it had come to be known, was no longer lost, but meticulously restored, researched, and ready to be shared. Eleanor's scholarly contributions to the exhibition catalog had earned her accolade from art historians and horologists alike, and she'd even been invited to give a series of lectures at the University of Geneva on the intersection of 18th-century art and mechanical science. She was, in her element, her intellect and passion finally finding their true expression. My role as principal consultant for the collection was both demanding and deeply rewarding. I worked closely with the museum's team of master watchmakers and conservators, sharing the specialized knowledge I had gained during the years of solitary restoration work. We established a state-of-the-art conservation lab dedicated to the ongoing care of these delicate mechanisms, ensuring their preservation for centuries to come. The foundation we had envisioned, supporting apprenticeships in horological arts, was also taking shape with the museum as our primary partner. The first cohort of young, aspiring artisans was due to start their training the following year, a prospect that filled me with a profound sense of purpose. We were not just preserving the past, we were investing in its future. Occasionally, news from home would filter through, usually via Eleanor's infrequent but dutiful calls with her mother. Beatrice, it seemed, had largely resigned herself to our new life, though she still couldn't quite comprehend why anyone would choose to live so far away when there were perfectly good golf courses and bridge clubs much closer to her. Her main topic of conversation now revolved around the escalating dramas of Cynthia and Gerald's lives. Gerald's financial woes had apparently deepened, his business ventures proving less than stellar, and Cynthia's social standing had taken a hit now that her brother-in-law, the man without prospects, was no longer a convenient foil for her own perceived sophistication. Their two children, despite their expensive boarding schools and early advantages, were, according to Beatrice's fretful accounts, struggling to find their own paths, lacking the drive and resilience that often comes from overcoming genuine challenges rather than having every desire instantly gratified. There was a certain karmic symmetry to it all, though I found no real pleasure in their misfortunes. Our lives had simply diverged so completely that their dramas now felt like dispatches from a distant, almost irrelevant galaxy. Philip, Eleanor's father, maintained a more direct, if still infrequent, correspondence with me. He'd send me clippings about new engineering marvels or ask my opinion on complex mechanical puzzles he'd encountered in his retirement. He never explicitly mentioned the events of that fateful anniversary dinner, but his letters were filled with a quiet, respectful curiosity about my work, a clear acknowledgement of a world he had previously dismissed but now, perhaps, dimly perceived the value of. One spring afternoon, as Eleanor and I were enjoying a coffee at our favorite lakeside cafe, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar Swiss number. It was the director of the Patek Philippe Museum, his voice filled with an unusual excitement. "Arthur, my friend," he said, "we have a situation, a rather extraordinary one. A small, private collector in Zurich has just passed away, and his estate includes a piece we believe may be the missing companion to one of the Jacquet Draws androids in your collection. The legendary celestial cartographer. It's only been rumored to exist. We need you to go to Zurich immediately to authenticate it." The celestial cartographer. It was the holy grail for automata enthusiasts, a mechanical marvel fabled to not only write and draw, but to accurately map the constellations as they appeared on any given night. If this was genuine, it would be a discovery of monumental importance. Of course, I said, my own pulse quickening. Eleanor and I will be on the next train. Within hours, we were in a dusty, vault-like room in a Zurich bank, standing before a draped object. The late collector's solicitor, a stern-faced woman with an air of immense gravitas, nodded to me. I reached out and slowly pulled back the velvet cloth. There, gleaming faintly in the dim light, was an automaton, a seated figure of an astronomer, his hand poised over a celestial globe, his intricate mechanism remarkably intact, though clearly in need of careful, expert attention. Its craftsmanship was unmistakable, its complexity breathtaking. It was, without a doubt, the lost masterpiece. As I began my preliminary examination, my fingers tracing the delicate levers and gears, Eleanor stood beside me, her eyes wide with wonder. This was it, another hidden treasure, another piece of forgotten genius, waiting to be brought back to life. The work, it seemed, was never truly done. There were always new mechanisms to understand, new histories to uncover, new beauties to restore. My prospects, once so derided, now stretched before me, as vast and intricate as the celestial map this extraordinary automaton was designed to draw. The man who had once been dismissed as a mere tinkerer was now on the cusp of another historic discovery. His life a testament to the enduring power of passion, patience, and the quiet, meticulous pursuit of hidden wonders. And by my side, sharing in the thrill of discovery, was the woman who had always believed, the woman whose love had been the unwavering mainspring in the often complex clockwork of my own life. The limousine that had picked me up that evening so long ago had not just been a mode of transport. It had been a portal, a passage into a future more extraordinary than I, or anyone in that suburban dining room, could ever have possibly conceived. The authentication and subsequent acquisition of the Celestial Cartographer by the Patek Philippe Museum became another landmark event in the horological world, further cementing my reputation and, more importantly, adding an unparalleled jewel to the collection I was now privileged to oversee. The delicate process of its restoration took the better part of a year, a labor of love that I undertook personally, often working late into the night in the museum's specially equipped lab, Eleanor frequently by my side, meticulously documenting every step, her own expertise in historical research proving invaluable in uncovering the automaton's lost provenance and the story of its enigmatic creator. The grand opening of the new museum wing dedicated to the Lost Collection and its newly discovered celestial companion was an international event, attended by scholars, collectors, dignitaries, and horology enthusiasts from around the globe. Standing beside Eleanor, watching as the world marveled at these resurrected mechanical wonders, I felt a quiet sense of fulfillment that transcended any personal accolades. We had not just saved these objects. We had given them a new life, a new voice to speak to future generations about the boundless ingenuity of the human spirit. We chose not to invite Eleanor's immediate family to the grand opening in Geneva. It was an event that belonged to a different sphere, a different understanding of value. However, we did send Beatrice and Philip a beautifully produced catalog of the exhibition, with a personal note from Eleanor. Beatrice, we later heard, kept it on her coffee table, showing it to her bridge club with a newfound, if somewhat bewildered, pride in her internationally renowned son-in-law, the clock expert. The irony was not lost on us. Philip, in his own quiet way, sent me a single, perfectly preserved 18th-century watchmaker's gear he'd found in an antique fair, with a simple note. "Thought you might appreciate this, Arthur. Keep up the good work." It was, for him, a profound gesture of respect and understanding. Cynthia and Gerald, predictably, remained silent, their world of fleeting trends and superficial status symbols having little intersection with the enduring legacy of craftsmanship and historical significance that now defined our lives. Their prospects, I occasionally mused, seemed to be perpetually under renovation, always chasing the next new thing, never quite finding the solid foundation of genuine contentment. Our foundation, supporting apprenticeships in the horological arts, was now thriving, nurturing a new generation of artisans who shared our passion for these intricate mechanical marvels. Watching these young men and women, their faces alight with concentration as they learned the delicate skills of a bygone era, was perhaps the most rewarding aspect of our new life. It was about passing on the torch, ensuring that this precious knowledge, this unique art form, would not be lost. One cool evening, as Eleanor and I sat on the balcony of our Geneva apartment, the lights of the city twinkling below, the distant chime of St. Peter's Cathedral marking the hour, she leaned her head on my shoulder. "You know, Arthur," she said softly, "that anniversary dinner, all those years ago, the one where they said you were utterly without prospects, in a way, they were right." I looked at her, surprised. "They were." "Yes," she said, a smile in her voice. "Because the prospects you had, the future you were quietly building, were so far beyond their limited imagination, so far outside their narrow definition of success, that they literally couldn't see them. You weren't without prospects, my love. You were simply operating in a different dimension, one they had no access to." Her words, as always, cut through to the heart of the matter with a gentle, loving precision. She was right. My world had always been one of hidden mechanisms, of intricate beauty concealed beneath a quiet surface. It had taken a journey across continents, a dive into centuries past, and the rediscovery of lost masterpieces for that world to finally, spectacularly, reveal itself. The limousine that had arrived that evening had indeed been a summons, not just to a new career, but to a new understanding of my own worth, a worth that had always been there, patiently ticking away, waiting for the right moment, the right catalyst to be fully wound and set in motion. And the prospects, as Eleanor so beautifully understood, were not just about wealth or status, but about purpose, passion, and the quiet, enduring satisfaction of a life dedicated to preserving and celebrating the extraordinary. That, I knew with a certainty that needed no external validation, was a treasure beyond measure, a mechanism of perfect, timeless design. The passing years saw the Lost Collection and the Celestial Cartographer become cornerstones of the Patek Philippe Museum, drawing visitors and scholars from every corner of the globe. My role as principal consultant gradually evolved into an emeritus position, allowing me more time for personal research and for guiding the young artisans in our horological foundation. Eleanor, too, became a respected figure in her own right, publishing several acclaimed monographs on the art and symbolism of 18th-century automata, her work celebrated for its meticulous scholarship and insightful interpretations. Our life in Geneva remained our anchor, though we traveled frequently, often to consult on other historical restoration projects or to lecture at universities. The small apartment in the old town was our sanctuary, filled with books, music, and the quiet hum of our shared intellectual pursuits. We never fully reconciled with Cynthia and Gerald. The chasm in values, in understanding of what constituted a life well lived, was simply too vast. Our interactions remained minimal, confined to polite, infrequent acknowledgments at larger family events, a distant echo of a past we had both long since moved beyond. Beatrice, however, in her final years, seemed to find a measure of peace and even a quiet pride in our unconventional success. She'd often call Eleanor, her voice frail but clear, to ask about our latest adventures, her early dismissal replaced by a belated, if still somewhat bewildered, admiration. She even, on one memorable occasion, confessed to Eleanor that she'd finally thrown out the hideous porcelain shepherdess that had once graced her living room, admitting that some old things, dear, are best left in the past. Philip, until the end, maintained his quiet, respectful correspondence with me, our shared engineering mindset a surprising, late-life bond. He passed away peacefully a few years after Beatrice, leaving behind a legacy of sturdy bridges and a quiet, if belated, appreciation for the intricate mechanics of his son-in-law's world. The foundation we established flourished, its graduates going on to become master craftsmen and women in their own right, ensuring that the delicate art of horological restoration would not just survive, but thrive in the 21st century. It was perhaps our most enduring legacy, a living testament to the power of passion, mentorship, and the preservation of precious skills. One afternoon, many years after that fateful anniversary dinner, Eleanor and I were browsing in a dusty antique shop in a small Swiss village, not unlike the one where we had first met. I came across a small, beautifully made 19th century bird box, its mechanism clearly broken, its song silenced. The shopkeeper, a grizzled old man with knowing eyes, shrugged when I inquired about it. Ah, that one. A pity. Beyond repair, I fear. Too intricate. No one has the skill for such things anymore. I picked it up, feeling the familiar weight of history, the silent promise of hidden ingenuity. I turned it over in my hands, my fingers already sensing the nature of the damage, the precise adjustments that would be needed. Eleanor watched me, a soft smile on her face. She knew that look in my eyes. Another project, Arthur? She asked gently. I met her gaze, and in that shared moment, all the years, all the challenges, all the quiet triumphs seemed to coalesce. The man once deemed utterly without prospects was still, at heart, a tinkerer, a restorer, a seeker of hidden beauty in the forgotten and the broken. Perhaps, my dear, I said, a familiar spark igniting within me. Perhaps just one more. For old time's sake. Because some mechanisms, like some lives, are simply too precious, too filled with intricate wonder, to be left silent. Their songs deserve to be heard, their stories told, their prospects, however initially unpromising, ultimately and beautifully realized. The Limousine had long since departed, but the journey it had initiated, the journey into a life of purpose, passion, and profound, quiet satisfaction, was one that continued, with every perfectly calibrated tick, every meticulously restored cog, every shared smile with the woman who had always understood the true mechanics of my heart.